Anabasis, the long way back. Our boys had reached the southern shores of the Black Sea, where a multitude of Greek colonies and cities were established. The first major Greek city they encountered was Anabasis, where they were welcomed by fellow Greeks. They rested and soon organized athletic games and dances to celebrate. But their struggles were far from over. Even though battered down and tired, they still remained probably the most formidable force in the known world at that point. And they knew it. The local cities engulfed them in their regional politics to avenge their enemies or extort payments from their neighbors. Of course, our boys knew it and were okay with it. They even played the card, we can be friends and destroy your enemies, or we can be enemies and destroy you. Another major challenge was that discipline started loosening, and many lesser bands started taking initiative and pillaging whatever they could lay their hands on. This, of course, caused casualties and complications with the locals, who were not too happy to share their property with the eager mercenaries. In one of the war councils, the generals agreed. Anabasis should take one of the ships provided by the locals and travel back to a Spartan-controlled city to request help and more ships to take them all back home. After he left, Xenophon procured more ships and sent back to Hellas via sea the women, the children, and those men who are sick or over the age of 40. Meanwhile, the army continued their march westwards. They leveraged their strength and allied with cities on the way. One of those local tribes was the Mercenaries, whose enemies the Greeks annihilated easily. Their target, Xenon, one of the greatest colonies nearby, a great harbor, a naval force capable of transporting them towards the Hellespont, next to continental Hellas. Despite some initial distrust, they convinced the ambassadors of Xenon of their friendly intentions and established good relationships. Traveling by sea, agreed, would be the best way home. But soon they realized this option had some technical challenges. They didn't have enough ships. And even though they could procure some through piracy or leasing, they were not enough for everyone. They knew their strength was in unity and refused to leave men behind. This is when the Greeks, being Greeks, started voicing their opinions. Too many opinions. Some started accusing Xenophon of being a tyrant. These charges were dismissed easily, but Dissent was making its appearance in the army. Soon, Anabasis returned with bad news. He could not secure support from the Spartans. No fleet. He did agree with Cleandrus, a Spartan regional overlord, to try and send a fleet to collect them soon. Try. The army could see it. Only united could they make it. Many voiced their support for Xenophon to take sole command. Xenophon, maybe tired from the burden of leading and dealing with all their crap, refused. Backed Anabasis instead. And unsurprisingly, now that the worst was behind and there was no common enemy, the Greek army started fighting. The Arcadians and Achaeans, almost half the army, disagreed with having a Spartan and an Athenian as leaders, and soon broke away. Ironically, they split because they wanted to extort nearby Greek cities and pillage them, simply because they could. Soon after, the army divided into 3 detachments, each following different routes toward mainland Greece. One was led by Xenophon, another by Anabasis, and the third by the Peloponnesians, the Arcadians and Achaeans. The Peloponnesians began attacking towns in eastern Thrace, while Xenophon and Anabasis continued their march home. But soon, the Peloponnesians were in serious trouble. They were surrounded, encircled on a hill by thousands of Thracians, people the Greeks called barbarians. They had no water, no food, no shelter, and no hope of escape. Arrows and javelins rained down upon them. They were being slaughtered. News spread quickly throughout the region. A Greek army was being destroyed. While leading his detachment, Xenophon heard the news. He gave a fiery speech, igniting the spirit of his men, and rushed forward to rescue their comrades. And when the barbarians saw the Greeks coming to save their brothers, they scattered. The Greeks embraced one another, many of them in tears. They realized how foolish their division had been. From that moment on, they reunited and vowed death to anyone who would suggest such stupidity again. After burying their fallen with honor, they resumed their march. Meanwhile, Chrysippus, the Spartan leader, died from sickness and old age. That old warrior did not receive the glorious death a Spartan might wish for, but he would still be remembered as a man of great honor. Yet the journey was far from over. The army was still in Asia. They had not yet crossed the Hellespont to European soil. They camped in hostile territory, no friendly Greek cities nearby, and no provisions. They heard that nearby villages might sell food, so they sent 2,000 men, unarmed, to buy supplies. But the gods were not in their favor that day. The local tribes ambushed them. Soon the attackers were joined by Persian cavalry, the same cavalry that had followed the Greeks all the way from Babylonia. They knew the Greeks were exhausted, and they came to finish them. Once again, our boys were given no rest. Many were killed. Others managed to fortify themselves on a hill, surrounded and under siege. Things were looking extremely bad. The news reached the army back at camp. Xenophon gathered the troops. He made sacrifices to the gods, then fortified their position. They had to rescue their comrades from the Persians. A detachment would stay behind to guard the camp. But no one volunteered. No one wanted to stay back. The men were furious. They were bloodthirsty. Only death would settle this score with the Persians. They sallied out to meet the Persian army, ready to make their last stand against an empire that wanted them dead. Once again, as so many times in history, a few Hellenes stood against a multitude of barbarians. Soon they realized the Persians were waiting for them on a hilly, wooded battlefield. Xenophon formed the army into phalanx formation. Then he walked up and down the line, shouting to his men, "You have faced these Persians before and beaten them. Remember your victories. Remember who we are. Remember, we are at the gates of Greece. Remember our ancestors. Remember Hercules. Remember your names." A sound began to rise from the army, a deep murmur. It grew louder and louder until it became a thunderous battle cry, thousands of men chanting in perfect unison. And you know very damned well what comes next. After a brief exchange between the ranged troops, the phalanx surged forward. They began climbing the hill, singing their war chants. When they reached the Persians, it was slaughter. The Persian line broke. Survivors fled and regrouped with local tribes on another hill. But the Greeks did not stop. Our boys rushed them again. This time, they annihilated them. The remaining Persians scattered into the woods. The day was theirs. And from that moment on, things began to change. For the better, much better. The Greeks had once again proven who ruled the battlefield. Friendly cities began supplying them. Hostile ones sent envoys asking what they must do to become friends of the Greeks. Rumors even spread that the army might establish a new city there and dominate the region. Meanwhile, a Spartan embassy arrived from Byzantium. It was led by Cleandrus. Remember, the Greek world was now dominated by Sparta. They had won the Peloponnesian War, and on paper, they were responsible for all Greek affairs, including the return of 10,000 hardened mercenaries from deep inside Persia. At first, there were misunderstandings, but through Xenophon's clever diplomacy, an agreement was reached. The army would be welcomed back to Europe, in Byzantium. Even Cleandrus himself, a Spartan general famous throughout Greece, was impressed by the discipline and fighting ability of the mercenary army. So impressed, in fact, that he volunteered to lead them home himself. Meanwhile, the Persian satrap, whose army had just been crushed, was terrified of them. He sent envoys to the Spartans, urging them to hurry the army across to Europe. Ironically, at that time, Sparta and Persia were actually on good terms. After all, the Persians had financed Sparta during the Peloponnesian War, Greeks being Greeks. The soldiers were promised salaries as well, both to secure their loyalty and to allow them to buy food. The crossing finally happened. Using ships from the Spartan admiral Anabasis, the army sailed across the straits and reached Byzantium. But once they arrived, the Spartans treated them badly, despite every agreement. They were not even allowed to enter the city. Instead, Anabasis ordered them to keep marching to the next city, where they were supposedly going to receive their pay. Our boys were exhausted, hungry, beaten by war, and now they had been double-crossed. One word brought another. Since the Spartans were not known generally for their kind attitude, chaos erupted. The boys stormed the city and took it, ready to pillage and destroy it. The citizens ran to their houses. The Spartan guard fortified itself in the Acropolis. Their captains ran away. They didn't look so tough now. Xenophon, always the cool-headed, jumped in front of the boys. To save them from doing something stupid against fellow Greeks, they complied. The situation calmed down. A lot of miscommunications and miscoordination ensued, together with the coming of new Spartan commanders to replace the old ones in the region. And soon, the Spartans started arresting whoever they would find foraging away from the army. It is said that they arrested and sold them as slaves, more than 400 Hellenes. Their misfortunes were endless. They were now in Europe, and their fellow Greeks were not just refusing to help them, but attacked them. An opportunity came soon, through an invitation of a local Thracian warlord who wanted to hire them to reclaim his crown. He promised them refuge, land, money. They had no alternative. After 2 months and minor battles in the midst of winter against barbarians, the warlord had not paid their salaries in full, asking them to wait some more. Mutiny was now a real possibility, and just when they were ready to fight against their own allies, Spartan envoys arrived. Sparta had declared war on the Persians, and their services were needed. They ferried them back into Asia and reunited them with the rest of the Greek regulars. They marched together, united, under Hellenic Spartan banners. And this is when another bad hombre, one of the greatest warrior kings Greece has ever produced, Agesilaus, comes into the story. The Greeks, united now, campaigned together and devastated the Persians before coming back home together. Our boys disbanded and continued on their own towards their home cities. Their legend would live on, and their story would be told for the next thousands of years. The next time Persia would encounter a united Greek army would be under Alexander, and that was destined to be their end. After the long march finally ended, Xenophon survived. In time, he became a close friend of Agesilaus and Cleandrus. He deeply admired the discipline of the Spartans and their famous laconic philosophy, so much so that he would later fight alongside them in battle, even against his own city, Athens. For this, the Athenians exiled him, but the Spartans welcomed him. They granted him land in the Peloponnese, not far from Olympia. There, Xenophon built a peaceful life. He erected temples dedicated to Artemis. He lived many good years with his wife and sons, and in that quiet place, he began to write the histories, the memoirs, the story of the march, the story that would make the 10,000 immortal. Because this, ladies and gentlemen, this is what an epic saga looks like. A legendary band of brothers, a truly dysfunctional family of warriors and adventurers who went out into the unknown and learned a brutal truth. When you live by the sword, you will most likely die by it. For 15 long months, they marched, more than 5,000 miles, across deserts and forests, across mountains and frozen valleys, through heat, snow, hunger, and constant war. They fought enemies and tribes they had never even known existed. They watched their friends die. They lost brothers, limbs, hope, and dreams. But what they gained was something far greater, eternal glory. Because their journey was written down, preserved, and told again and again through the centuries. A story that will never fade. The story of the 10,000.